Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this fifth and final part of the discussion, the trilogy with Freddie Feltham, we discussed a specific example of the gap in communications between politics and the public, which very topically right now is wealth tax, emerging as a political discussion where the gap between popular discussions and reality is too great to form any meaningful action. And the reason, of course, is because much of the public isn't particularly minded to trust what they see as establishment voices, even if they're telling the truth. And when you don't listen to experts, you end up listening to people who are, by definition, not experts and may or may not get their information from experts. But Freddie also came up with another interesting notion: what Labour could do if the next election starts to look quite ropey.
Yeah. And the wealth tax thing, I mean, what I found a bit disheartening about that stuff is just like the lack of understanding by some comrades on my left flank around how tax policy works, right? Where
Yeah.
we're trying to explain conceptually, and this is an interesting thing because this is mainly happening on the short form, less so on the long form discussion. But on the short form discussion, we tried to basically conceptually explain capital flight, and people just don't believe it. People
No.
don't believe that if you ceased being a UK tax resident, it becomes really hard for
It's
the UK to tax those
because
assets.
it's so different to people's ordinary lives. Like for you or I, if we wanted to dodge UK tax, we would actually have to move to Dubai. We'd physically have to move. Whereas what you can't get to people is super, because it's a red herring, this thing about leaving the UK, complete red herring. Because like if you've got someone super wealthy and they've got a home in London and they've got another one in Berlin and they've got another one in Cyprus, they've got another one in New York, and they move around between them. And at the moment they're registered in the UK for tax, that's their main residence. And all they have to, and what people don't get is they don't have to leave. They just have to say all of a sudden that actually now their main residence is New York. And nothing
Yeah.
has to change with their lives. They still get to stay in London because they're not staying all the year. Like we are in our home all the year round. So it's and another. I think a big thing, which I don't think came up in your thing with Dan Needle, but a lot of things did come up in it. But I think one problem people have as well is they think the UK economy is a thing, when it's not. There's no such thing. Like an economy is just a system of trade, right? Well, we trade globally. So there is no, the UK economy, as far as it means anything, literally just means the values of trade we have with the rest of the world as if we were separate, but we're not separate. And the problem is we feel constrained by the UK economy because actually we're not. Because if you have a bit of spare money, you can actually invest in America. So you can actually move some of your money. But by and large, our money is based here and our income is based here, and that's all there is to it. But if you're really, really wealthy, you can move it.
Yeah.
Like the UK economy doesn't have real boundaries.
No, but also most people's wealth is their home. I mean, for a normal person, like
Yeah.
all your wealth is in your property.
Mm.
And so when people say, well, they can't move their house, you go, yeah, but their house is not their wealth. I mean,
No.
for a super rich person, your portfolio, I'm
Yeah,
afraid,
yeah.
is not just your house. Do you
No,
think
it's not.
that house values are increasing at a rate in lockstep with the S&P 500?
Mm.
You have got it. You're not
No.
informed. I'm sorry to say it. You're not
But that's the
informed. You don't know
problem.
that.
See, people's concept of wealth can only be in their own terms.
Yeah,
So they
exactly.
just
Exactly.
think that super wealthy people are just like them, but with shitloads more money.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, the irony is that super rich people, and I've met lots of really wealthy people.
Mm.
So just for a bit of context, I was fortunate enough to be educated in places with very posh people. I've met loads of posh people. I'm doing a bit of a Gary Stevenson shtick now, but like this is just worth bearing in mind, right? Like super rich people are just human beings. They're human beings who have a lot of rational self-interest. They have so much self-interest because they have
Yeah,
so many things that they own, right?
yeah,
And so, in that context, you have to think, what would you do if you had all of this stuff? It's
mm.
all well and good saying, from a moralized perspective, because you've lived the life that you've lived and you understand the scarcity of resource that goes
Yeah,
around in working class communities and the realism of that and how unfair it is that some
mm.
people have barely enough to get by. These people have no idea about this
No,
stuff. They have never, and I'm being serious
mm.
here, never met anyone. They've never been to the poorest parts of the UK. They have no idea what it's like. They've never been to a working man's club, like in their life, ever. And like, you have to understand it. Like, if that is your frame of reference,
Yeah,
what is the behavioral attitude that you're going to have? Of course, you're going to think, I'm going to do what's best by me, because I'm
yeah,
sure you would just do what's best by you.
yeah,
And that is literally the maxim by
yeah.
which these people
But I mean,
work from.
and this came up. This did come up in your video. But the thing that annoys me most is it's not even like we're saying you can't tax the wealth anyway, so just forget it. It's like you can, just not in that way.
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
there is a way to do it that economists have been, and Nobel Prize winning economists talk about today. Some of the most famous economists in history have talked about it for a very long time. Why don't we all just get behind that?
Yeah, I mean, I mean, the land value tax is an obvious thing that we could do now to phase in a much better
Yeah,
functioning tax system. The reason it's not been done is because, and Dan made this point,
yeah,
and it really did change a lot of my thinking about this. You know, I've often thought democracy doesn't work properly. It's responding to the wrong incentives. It's actually responding to properly, right? It's responding to people who are saying, I am not going to give up
yeah,
my asset,
exactly.
which is my home, which is
Yeah,
overinflated.
yeah,
And what normal people need to realize is that just because you bought a house in you know, whatever, Hackney 20 years ago, before it got gentrified, and now it's what, 10x in value, doesn't make you some property mogul, right? Like, you're not Donald Trump because you got lucky, right? Like,
okay.
what you've got here is a problem with the way the market is structured, which is overinflating assets, which now means that people like my age are unable to own them. So you have to redress that.
But
But that's
I would still say you, because you talked about phasing in there. I would still say you can phase it in, so you don't have to hit people's homes. You could start off with the first of all. I mean, because I read a Nobel Prize winning economist who actually suggested. So what you would do to begin with, at least, because you'd use it to replace council tax anyway, you wouldn't have both. You could actually easily make sure that for primary residences, this land value tax was lower than the council tax is right now for everyone, because there's shitloads of land that's not taxed at all. So you could start with that. So you could actually make it cheaper than council tax, because at the moment council tax is for properties, but most land doesn't have property on it. There's people who own half of entire counties who are paying zero tax on on that land. So we could start with that. And you can always, like, I mean, although land value tax is like the economist solution, it can be massaged. You know, you can say things like, all right, that land's for your primary residence. All right, so you pay a lower rate of tax because that's useful. We want you to live somewhere. Whereas a grouse moor, yeah, that's not useful, mate. We're going to charge you through the nose for that. Oh, you don't
yeah.
like it? Well, you can sell it then, because you can't hide it in Monaco, can you?
Yeah. I mean, this is the thing, is that
So you
yeah.
could
I mean,
start off. You don't have to have the full bells and whistles version of it ready to roll, because that'll take like 20 years to work out anyway. You could start off by just going, there's land there that's not being taxed. Let's start with that. So why don't you just put a tax on land that doesn't have property on it to begin
yeah,
with?
yeah. The problem is, though, is that, and whilst I agree with you, I think this is basically what the government now has to do, because essentially, Labour are in a bit of a hole right now,
Yes.
electorally, and now what they should just
It's
do is just do some painful things, and it might not even get them elected, but do it because it's the right thing to do for the country. In my view, you can't resuscitate the Labour brand. Labour could be in a really difficult position, you know, at the next election, and if they've not done things that help this country long term, then it'll be very difficult to come back into the fold later down
yeah,
the
yeah.
line.
So yeah, I mean, so in terms of that, because that's quite an interesting point. So I would certainly say, first of all, I do think people are too down at the moment, because what they're doing, Labour have stumped up the cost for things that they're bringing in, but the things they're bringing in aren't here yet, and some of them will be by the next election.
Yeah,
But there is an extent to which, yes, you say to yourself, right, so let's say, for the sake of argument, they thought we're on the hiding to nothing here. Why not just go for it? Why not absolutely just go for it and do mad shit, which is what Liz Truss thought. Only if it wasn't, let's say it was mad shit led by experts, instead of, like, you know, Tufton Street.
yeah. Instead of the IEA.
So then they could do that, and that would then, because the Labour will have two problems if they lose the next election. the first problem is obviously losing the next election. That's always a problem for them. But the second one will be, as in what happened in 2010 when they lost. You maybe don't remember too much, but what happened in 2010 when they lost, I'm sure people have told you anyway, is they lost through a combination of things. First of all, they've been in power for a while, so, familiarity breeds contempt. Gordon Brown, not the greatest campaigner. I'm a big fan of his, but he wasn't a good campaigner. We had a literal recession. It was caused by global influences, but obviously, the Tories said otherwise. There was a combination of, and then obviously all this started a little bit of infighting in Labour about, because panic because they were going to lose the election, right? So there was all sorts of mad shit happen. But all they needed to do when they lost was just go, look, we were in power for 13 years. We had a global crash. Dust ourselves. We did a load of good stuff. We had a list as long as your arm, list as long as an orangutan's arm of things, really good things we did. We just need to point out when the Tories are destroying them and stuff like that and come back. But they didn't. They had to have a massive ad dab. They had to have we've got to re-examine the very soul of the party. And that would be the second problem they will have. Instead of just going, look, we got some shit wrong and some circumstances worked against us. Let's distill what worked and then fix what didn't and come back stronger. They will have my fear is they'll have another 10-year midlife crisis and be in no fit state to do anything for another generation.
Let me push back in two veins. Look, I was 10 years old in 2010, not very politically literate at the time. So I'm not going to give any strong opinions on that. Look, I've read a bit of political history, and I think it's broadly agreed that when we came in 97, we inherited something actually that was working quite well. That John Major, despite the fact that he was not, he was voted out of office quite comprehensively in 97, he got the economy pointing in the right direction, and it meant that the government could go and do some really incredible socially progressive things. And what I would say is that whilst politicos might argue that John Major never got the right enough credit from the public for doing what he did, the country was in a better place. And I think the main reason you go into politics is to fix the country, right? If you're going into politics because you want to be re-elected and want to be in a position of power for as long as possible, that is not the right reason.
It can be, though, because if you believe that you are, and this is where the greater good argument there is a greater good argument, but it goes too far sometimes. If you believe that your opponents will make things much worse, you have to believe it's better for you to be in power, even if you have to tie your hands a little bit, like, we're not going to increase income tax type of thing, isn't it?
Well, tax things never get undone once they're done because they're politically painful. People go, well, thank you. Actually, behind closed doors, go, thank you, you've done it. Like it's like thumbs up. And I just think that it's not, if the government can't do the things that it needs to do, things will be much worse as a result of us getting voted out, and then we'd get voted out of power. Yeah. And it would seem that we were the people who were responsible, not the Tories, right? And I think if you can say that things started to shift and change in the Labour government, it's about longevity for me. It's about having a party that can actually, preside over something that's more functional long term. And also, we have to bear in mind that whilst that soul searching in 2010 might have been a bit OTT, that there does seem to be something happening right now that is, on the global stage, I think, much more revolutionary politically than what we experienced in 2008. It should have happened in 2008. Your Yanis Varoufakis will argue that was the missed boat to be able to kind of restructure the political economies of developed countries.
Like the thing is, I mean, one of the things that is a political reality is people, by and large, don't. Politicians talk about radical reform all the time. People don't want it, but they will when there's an emergency. So, for example, topically with the water, for example, we talk about the crumbling Victorian infrastructure. But when that Victorian infrastructure was new, it was revolutionary. But it only came in because of the big stink in like the middle of the 19th century. People talk about Attlee rebuilding after the Second World War. We just had a World War. People regarded that as an emergency. So I agree. Yeah. So the banking crisis, the Greek gentleman you mentioned is an absolute idiot. But he's right on that, in that if you have an emergency, use it. The Tories had an emergency in 2010 with COVID. They had an opportunity to massively change a load of stuff. They just used it to stuff their pockets instead, unfortunately. But times like that, yes. The problem is, what is the emergency now? People don't really think it. That's why the public will only let you do it when they think there's an emergency. That's why populists are trying to always give this sense of crisis, to give them the mandate when they come in to change stuff. That's what Trump's doing at the moment.
Yeah, but I mean, there is a crisis. There is a crisis coming, though. I mean,
there is a climate crisis.
There's a climate crisis coming, but there's an economic crisis coming, right? Which is that, and look, the bond markets, I think yesterday, were looking incredibly jittery, and no one's really able to explain what's going on. I mean, the baseline reading of that is that investors are not confident in where the British economy is going, and every developed economy, and I think France has a higher debt to GDP ratio than we do.
Yes.
Every developed economy right now is hooked on debt, which essentially implies that the big state is here to stay. That's what citizens expect.
Yeah.
But the only way you're going to get out of that debt problem, I mean, from in conventional ways of thinking, is you're going to cut shit, right? And there is not an appetite right now for austerity. But that is exactly what's coming down the tracks with that, as you say, like a populist right who want the crisis to exist. And if you are going to, and this is sorry for this, I'm going to have to jump off in a second, but sure. I just want to leave you with this thought, which is something that's just I've been mulling over. Look, I don't have the answer to this. This is just a question that I have, and I'm trying to figure out with our podcast. But it's like, if you have essentially AI and deregulation of the financial sector, and deregulation of AI being the only way in which you can push economies forward, that is going to lead to mass unemployment.
Yes.
That's already happening right now, and it's happening, funnily enough, to the credential class first, right? Like it's the lawyers and the consultants,
people like that. There's plenty of high-paid jobs that AI could do for you.
That's all that the AI can right now, as of right now, do much more efficiently than us. But there's, again, recourse in history to be a bit worried here. It's when you have a disenfranchised middle class and elite, and over-competing elites, that revolutions happen. Because those people have political power and acknowledge that they don't have agency, and they're meant to. They know that they're meant to.
Yeah.
And so this is the thing, is that if the radical right want to lead this revolution, which it looks like they are, to some form of, techno-futurist, maybe techno-feudalist world, where does that leave everybody else? And I don't think that people will take that line down. And in that situation, actually, there is going to need to be some quite radical soul searching done at the political theory middle class bullshit level to be able to figure out how we fix that.
Well, I mean, the easy answer at the moment, even though it's not an easy answer because no one's come up with it, is there will come a critical mass of people that will then require some form of if you cannot, like what's happened with technological advances in the past is you've then created new jobs. If that stops happening, you're going to need some form of UBI, because you're going to have some way of saying, we can't have, like, there's a critical mass of people you cannot allow to starve.
Yeah, exactly. But what agency is that? It's like people just living just off benefits. Is that going to make people happy? I just don't think. I think we're already.
You're almost going into Stalinism, where it's like, well, we'll pay them to dig a hole, and then we'll pay someone else the next day to fill it in again.
Yeah, I'm not advocating for that, but
no. But I am. Nonetheless, you are right. I mean, you can't just have UBI and let people sit at home all day. Because
you can argue that's what we already have to a certain degree in this country, and there's a lot of dissatisfaction as a result. And this is the thing as well about, like, we're gonna have to have an honest conversation about the welfare stuff, right? Like, I appreciate that the government's cuts seemed pretty harsh, and it wasn't obvious how they were going to get people who are on disability back into work. It wasn't a clear formulated plan.
It was no link between work and that. They were taking away an in-work benefit.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm sympathetic to why people wanted to push back on it. But what you can't have is essentially everyone who's working subsidizing even more people who aren't working. If you have squeezed the middle more, which is basically where we're currently going, and we're going to have higher tax rises, And also you have a tax system where there is like so much fiscal drag for like single mothers and stuff like that as well. That people will not vote for that. Like, they just will not vote for that, and then we will be out of government. And I want there to be more conscious thinking about how we're going to sort this thing out, because I don't know the answer. I'm only like, I'm 25 years old and I'm learning on the job. But
Alexander the Great conquered the world when he was a teenager, mate.
yeah, right, sorry, I should fix up, shouldn't I? I apologise, team. I should be bigger than we are. But look, I just wanted to leave on this note. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I think between the two of us, probably as many questions as answers here. But what we're trying to do with our channel is to help people make sense of this stuff, and give a proper steel man to the other side. Like there's more to learn and to know than what we currently think we do. And I hope that people are more curious and willing to come with us on this journey about trying to figure out what the hell is left of our political institutions, of our political systems, and even the left itself. What does it look like now? And then hopefully, come what may in 2028, 2029, and after it, we can have a quite cogent response without any ad dabs.
So there we are. Really enjoyed discussing some of these issues with someone with a very different set of experiences of politics. As always, link to Freddie's channel in the description below, but let me know what you think in the comments below. And for more content, you could subscribe to the channel or even join for access to streams and behind the scenes updates. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.